Time for Shannon Ezzat and the speech of his life, which Justin Vallis may write a song about because it's so inspirational, certainly to be. Let me tell you about Shannon Ezzat. He's from Glace Bay. He's a mathematician and mathematics educator at CBU right now. He has a passion for discovering and applying mathematics and teaching these concepts to both mathematicians and non-mathematicians, which I am assuming most of us would be. Are there any mathematicians? Half one. Okay, half one. He graduated from the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, PhD in mathematics in 2012, and a graduate diploma in teaching and learning in 2006. He's also an excellent musician and can be heard on the Fun for the Whole Family CD by Colin Grant. And when I heard that Shannon was going to be the speaker today, I was just thinking, oh my God, this is going to be so awesome. This is going to be wicked, because I've seen how Shannon's mind works most often at my own kitchen table playing board games. And if you've never had the chance to play a board game against Shannon, it will be really fun, but you're not going to win. Because you can always tell he's thinking like in 4 dimensions, like time is not necessarily linear. He's got it all planned out when you think you're, forget about poker, Risk, Axis and Allies, Settlers of Catan, Monopoly, Trivial Pursuit, Backgammon, Battleship, Connect 4, Twister, Jumanji, Hungry Hippos, and Clue. Please help me welcome tonight's keynote speaker, Shannon Ezzat.
Well, thank you, Rob, for those wonderful, yes, frightening words. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'd like to thank Nudon for inviting me to do this. It's such a fantastic event that happens every month, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. So, I'll start telling you about, before that, I want to talk about board games for a second since Rob brought it up. Games are really hard to solve in general, but Connect 4, a computer can always beat you at Connect 4 now. Computers can beat you at Connect 4 and checkers, and that's about it. That's all computers can do now. So if anybody ever says, hey, do you want to play Connect 4 against my computer for money? Say no. All right. So, you heard most of this. Oh, what happened there? All right, well, I can talk while this is... Oh, there we go. Yeah, this is most of the things that Rob said, but I started off at Glace Bay High. Had some great math teachers there, Arlene Andretrick and John McCachran, 2 of them. And then I went off to the big city of Halifax to do my undergrad at Dalhousie. Some great professors there. And then literally on a whim, I found a brochure in the Student Union building at Dal saying, come do a teaching degree in New Zealand. And I did. I was sold by the brochure. That never happens. So I was... just give me 1 second. There we go. I feel less constrained now. I was here in Christchurch, down in the South Island, and I went to Christchurch College of Education. It's now part of the University of Canterbury, and did what's equivalent to a BEd down there. And then I came back to Halifax for a bit and decided I wanted to keep doing math, so I got in contact with some professors I knew down there. Most notably this guy, his name is Ben Martin. He was my PhD supervisor. You can see him there making hot cross buns on Easter. And I went to the University of Canterbury and did my PhD there. And here's my PhD topic, and I'm only going to talk about this: representation growth of finitely generated, torsion-free, nilpotent groups. Everybody knows what they are? All right, yeah, so I won't explain too much about that. There's one of my friends baked a cake for me to celebrate, so I thought I'd put a picture of that up there. I guess I'll explain my thesis in about a minute. So let's start off with groups are. Groups are the way mathematicians talk about symmetry. So I guess I do this example always, so I might as well do it now, yeah? So if I tell you I have an object and I can do 2 things to it to make it look exactly the same, 3 things to it to make it look exactly the same. I can rotate it 180 degrees, I can flip it horizontally, and I can flip it vertically. If they're the only 3 things I can do to it, then, after you think about it for a while, you'd come up with the thought that, hey, you must have a rectangle. That's the only, or something rectangular-ish. That's the only thing that has those 3 symmetric properties. So you rotate it 180 degrees, it looks the same. You flip it horizontally, or you flip it vertically, and it looks the same. And so mathematicians talk a lot about objects by their symmetries, and that's groups. That's groups. Finitely generated torsion-free nilpotent groups means nice, and representation growth is a roundabout way of studying these groups. They're kind of hard to study, so we count how many ways you can turn them into something called matrices, which are mathematical objects that are pretty well known. So that was my PhD. All right. And when I'm not doing math, I play a little bit of music. I wouldn't say I'm in any bands, but some bands decide to be really nice and let me play with them for some reason. And there I am there, and there I am there, and there I am there. I wear a lot of plaid shirts, apparently. And Colin Grant was nice enough to let me play a track on his 2010 album, Fun for the Whole Family. So that was really cool of him. So, the type of math that I think about is mostly something called pure math. And so that's the best way to describe that is math with no use. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but that's this group theory here. So we study symmetry. Also, I did my honors thesis with a guy named Jason Brown at Dalhousie on the mathematics of music, and we studied musical scales. I'll talk about a bit about this later. Jason Brown, he's kind of famous now. Does everybody know the song A Hard Day's Night? You know how there's that chord at the start? Well, for the longest time, nobody knew exactly what notes were being played and what instruments these notes were being played on. So Jason Brown, huge Beatles fan. He's a good guitar player too, knows all the songs. He's like, hey, I can use some math to figure this out. So we did something called Fourier transforms, whatever they were, to figure out what frequencies were in this chord, and then used a little deductive reasoning to realize, hey, George Harrison's playing this note on the guitar, and John Lennon's playing those notes on the guitar, and Paul McCartney's playing on the bass, and then he discovered there's also a piano in there. And he figured out that their producer, George Martin, was playing the piano in that too, which wasn't really known at the time. So that was kind of a big thing in the music community. And so now he writes articles for Guitar World every so often, which is really cool. I'm also going to talk a bit about voting theory. It's another interest of mine. Game theory I'm not going to talk about, but it's kind of the mathematics of competition and cooperation, how you can study how people can cooperate with each other to get results and how people can compete with each other to get the best results for them. And something else called number theory, which is the study of numbers. And I'll talk about one more topic at the end, but I'll leave it until then. So we'll start with the mathematics of music. So a musical note is generated by a sound wave. Give me 1 second. I'm going to grab this guitar. So you have this guitar, and I pluck a note, and that moves sound to your ears. And depending on how fast that sound is traveling to your ears, that determines what note you hear. So if I play this note, and And this note, the second note sounds higher in pitch because it's moving faster to your ears. I'm going to play two notes right now, this one and this one. And hear how they kind of sound the same, except one's higher than the other? That's because they're an octave apart. That means that this note here has frequency, let's call it F, just to give it a name for this frequency. Then this note has twice that frequency, 2F. So whenever the frequencies have one is double the other, we call that an octave. And you can see that on the piano. Every time you see like a C, and then you go up and you see another C, everything between them is one octave, and then you go to the next C, and everything between them is another octave, and it keeps going. So you can talk about when notes sound good together, pleasing to our ears. And so the idea is that the relationships between the two frequencies should be kind of a small ratio, so that if you express them as a fraction, that the numbers are nice and small. So an example of something with a small ratio would be something like this. For musicians, that's called a fifth, and that's like the most pleasing kind of sound to our ears in some sense, the most natural two notes that can go together, and it sounds very pure. A non-example, this isn't exactly the non-example we're going to play, it's a little different, but that one doesn't sound as good. The ratios of those notes is something like, you get numbers like 128 in there or something like that. So you get these big numbers, which means that the notes don't sound as good together. There's musical uses for them, but just as notes sounding good together, they don't really. So, we want to make an octave that sounds really good. Now, the thing is with an octave, if you know a little bit about music, you can play in different keys. And we want each key to be as usable as possible. So, with some mathematical properties I'm not going to get into right now, but what we need something that once we multiply a frequency by it a bunch of times, by the same number, we get an octave. Now, you're wondering, this is a question that popped in my mind years ago, but why is there 12 notes in an octave? And it sounds like a weird number just to pick, right? And really, it's because 2 to the 7 over 12 is really close to 3/2. So our ear hears that as a nice, pure frequency. It's a little bit off, but our ear adjusts enough to, so that we don't really notice a difference. So, and the thing is, there's nothing with a power below 12 that gives an approximation to 3/2 as well. And even above, it's not until you get up to something like 41 or 43 where you get another good approximation of 3/2. So 12 is kind of a natural number of notes to have in an octave. So we have our notes in our octave here. So here's C. You can imagine this if it was a keyboard on the piano, and I took out an octave and I wrapped it around a circle, yeah? So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And there's the black notes in between them. Okay, now forget about that. And I pretend that this is just a table with 12 chairs around it, yeah? And if I said I want to get 6 people coming over for dinner to sit around this table, and I want to sit them out as evenly as possible, then that problem, you can think about it for a second and you'd realize, hey, I might as well just put one in every second seat, and then there's one seat between them. Let's say that instead of 6 people, then 7 people come over. If 7 people come over, then things get a little more complicated, because you're definitely going to have some people sitting next to each other, because you can't have a space in between. You can only do that with 6. So you have to figure out the best way to have people sitting next to each other. And so there was some math done on this by 2 guys named John Clough and Jack Douthat in the 90s. And they discovered, or invented, however you look at it, that this here is the best arrangement. That there is a way to determine the most even, the maximally even arrangement of sitting, let's say, 7 people around a table with 12 chairs. And it turns out that the way to do this is the exact same way that the major scale sits in the octave here. So imagine these are your people. So you have people at these chairs here, and then you have an empty chair, and a person, an empty chair, and a person, an empty chair, and then you have 2 people, an empty chair, another person, an empty chair. And if you notice, kind of the 2 people together are in some sense not as far apart as possible, but still pretty far apart. If they were as far apart as possible, then some stuff would screw up over here, where you have people closer together than they should be. So this is the best that you can do. And it turns out that this is related to music in that way. And so I guess this is a good illustration of the power of mathematics. So we had this problem, which was sitting people around a circular table. And what mathematics does is it boils that problem down to what are you actually doing. Is you have a circle, and you have a bunch of fixed points around it, and you want to pick 7 of them in this case out of 12, so that kind of the distances between the total distances is a minimum in some sense. And so once you solve that problem, you think about it and you realize that the musical scale is the same problem. And so math has already solved that problem once you solve the chairs and the people and the table problem. And this also comes up in musical rhythm, this whole idea of maximal evenness. The same thing comes up in chemistry with electron behavior with something called the Ising model. Electrons like to sit as far away as possible from each other, but they only have a certain number of places to go. And in random number generation as well, this type of stuff comes up. Yeah, especially if you're using a scientific calculator to generate a random number, the idea of maximal evenness definitely comes up then, and you have to be a little bit careful depending on how precise you want to be. All right, so I'm going to stop talking about music for a bit and jump right into voting. So, mathematicians like to study voting. Oh, maybe I'll pick up my mic. Sorry about that. I got ahead of myself. I'm used to lecturing, and then you don't have a mic when you lecture. So anyway, mathematicians really like to study voting. I guess, it's there's numbers in it, there's lots of patterns and arrangements, so mathematics, it's a powerful tool for something like this. Basically, the underlying question in voting theory is you want to determine the best method to reflect the will of the voters. Now, there's loads of systems out there. The one that we have is called first past the post. That's just everybody votes, and whoever gets the most votes wins. There's something called proportional representation. England was thinking about instant runoff voting. That's another system. And there's a bunch of other wilder systems out there that are kind of new that got invented in the last 20 or 30 years out there. So there was a guy in the 50s named Kenneth Arrow. He was a social choice theorist. And so he thought about this problem. And he said, you know what I want in my voting system? I want that these 4 things hold. And they're all pretty reasonable. So the first one is that any voter can have any set of preferences he likes. So he can like any party as much as he wants, or any candidate. He can rank them however he wants, yeah? That's a nice thing to have in a voting system. The second one is that if every voter prefers one choice to another choice A to choice B, then the whole group prefers choice A to choice B. That's another thing we want in our voting system. If everybody prefers choice A to choice B, then choice A wins. The third thing we want is that if every voter prefers A to B, then any change in the preference of some other candidate or party isn't going to affect the group preference for A over B. And the fourth one is that everybody's vote counts. There's not just one person there that says, hey, I would like that guy to win. Person A now wins. That is a terrible system. Cubans might like it. I don't know. I do not. Anyway, so Kenneth Arrow proved, and the proof's not too bad to look at. I'm not going to prove it now, but turns out there's absolutely no voting system that satisfies all of these four things. It's impossible to have a voting system that satisfies these. So, basically, voting theory now says there's no perfect voting system, so we have to think about what are the best ones for our purposes. So we have to make some judgment calls about what things in voting we think are important or not. So there's some arguments about which voting systems are good and which voting systems are bad. I think most mathematicians out there and voting theorists realize that first past the post, the system that we have now, is really terrible for lots of reasons. There's lots of tactical voting, so you don't actually express the preference for the candidate you win. You just want to like make sure somebody else doesn't win, so you vote for your not as preferred candidate, so that's not really good. There's something called Diverger's law, which says that any first past the post system eventually just becomes a two-party system. And it's basically because anytime parties lose, they can merge together and form a bigger party that can win. If you vote for somebody not in the first two, you can kind of think of your vote as wasted. You really didn't have an outcome on the election. It's a really simple system, and this is something to think about. In the last 10 years, there's been a lot of work done on voting, and computers have gotten really powerful. And so every political party out there right now has a lot of statisticians and really smart people working for them. Not in terms of policy or anything like that, but just in terms of optimizing the number of votes they get. So elections kind of stopped being about platforms and policy and started being about optimization of votes. So you just want to say, hey, in this riding, there's a lot of people who like hockey, so I'm going to build a hockey rink in that riding, and you can really game the system that way. That was a simple example, but these statisticians are really clever at picking out patterns that you can really focus on and pull out votes that way. And there's loads more problems I won't even get into. All right. So another thing about voting, you can think, let's say we perfected our voting system and we're fine with that. We pick one that we're happy with. Now there's still another problem. Once we vote, that's not all the voting that's done. So our politicians also have to vote in the House of Parliament or House of Commons or in the mayoral chambers. So there's something called the discursive dilemma, which I'm going to talk about now. So here's our illustrious council there, Mayor Cecil Clarke. There's Elda MacDonald, our councillor, a bunch of other people. No, there's George MacDonald. He was the councillor for Glace Bay, where my parents live. And the rest are a bunch of people. Anyway. So, imagine there's 5 people who think that roads are important and that your municipality has money for roads this year. 4 other people think that roads are important, but we don't really have money. We should spend our money somewhere else, so we don't have the money this year to deal with roads. And 3 people in Group C think the opposite. So we have money for roads, but really we should focus it in other places. The roads aren't as important. Let's just say for now that all the councillors agree that the only way to fix the roads is that if we agree that roads are important and we agree that we have money for roads. So let's say Cecil Clarke, he wants to, what does he want to do? He wants the roads to be fixed. I know he doesn't, but let's say he does. So I'll let you guys think about it and talk amongst yourselves for a bit. He has 2 options. So the first option is he has 1 vote, and the vote is, should we fix the roads this year? His second option is 2 separate votes. The first vote, our roads are a priority in the CBRM, and the second vote, do we have money to fix the roads this year? So think about that for a second. I'll give you 30 seconds to talk amongst yourselves and see if you come up with a solution. Yeah, Mayor Clarke wants to fix the roads. All right. Who says we should go for option number 1? Who says we should go for option number 2? And option 1 again. And option 2. Well, let's think about it. We'll figure it out. So, if we have one vote, should we fix the roads this year? Everybody agrees that both conditions need to be true to fix the roads. So all of this group says, hey, I agree that roads are important and we have money for roads, so I'm going to vote yes, we should fix the roads. Group B says, well, I think roads are important, but we don't have money for roads, so I can't vote to fix the roads, so they vote no. Third group says, we have money, but I don't really care about the roads that much this year, so I'm going to vote no as well. So we have 5 people voting for and 7 people voting against, and so the roads don't get fixed. Now, let's look at it in the 2 separate votes. If we vote our roads are priority in the CBRM, Group A and Group B thinks they are, so that's 9 against 3, so that passes. And then the second vote, do we have money to fix the roads this year? Well, Group A and Group C think we have money, so it's 8 against 4. So if you separate it into 2 votes, we realize that roads are a priority, and we do have money, so therefore the roads get fixed. So it's this weird situation where if you break people down into smaller groups and you have smaller votes, you don't get the same outcome as if you put it all together. So I guess if you're looking for strategies and stuff like this, if you ever have things where both conditions need to be true, so if you have 2 things that need to happen in order for somebody to say yes, it's probably a better option to separate it into 2 votes. Let's look at it the other way. Now let's go federal. So there's Stephen Harper over there. There's our MPs. So I just came up with some mock parliament. This has no reflection of my political views at all. So this is you can imagine this happens though. So we have 90 Liberals, 145 Tories, 73 NDPs, yeah? No problem. So we're talking about the military budget now. So the Liberals think that we don't really need to defend the North. It's not really a priority, but we do need to replace our warships. Conservatives don't think that the North is important or that we need to fix our warships at all. The NDP thinks that defending the North is important, but our ships don't need replacing yet. So Prime Minister Harper, being a conservative, he doesn't want to increase the military's budget because he doesn't think that defending the North is important or that the ships need replacing. Now, again, he has 2 options. He can have 1 vote, should we increase the military's budget, or 2 votes, separating each thing. This time it's a little different, though. This time everybody agrees that only 1 condition needs to be true in order to increase the military's budget. So if defending the North is important, the NDP is going to vote to increase military spending, even though they don't think that the ships need replacing. So it's kind of the same logic, but just flipped around a little bit. So here, if we hold 1 vote, should we increase the military's budget? This guy's going to say yes, since the ships need replacing, and he thinks that's enough to increase the military's budget. The NDP says yes, because defending the North is important. Conservatives say no. These guys have more votes than the Conservatives, so it passes. But in 2 separate votes, then should we spend money on Arctic sovereignty? It's 73 against 135, so that fails. And should we replace our warships? What is that? That is 218 against 90, so that fails. So depending on how you set up the vote, you can really influence what outcome you want. In this case, if you have things where only 1 condition needs to be true and you want something to fail, you should put it into 2 separate votes, and if you want it to pass, you should put it into 1 vote. So so elections are really weird like that. Voting doesn't behave in the way that you think it will. It's a little counterintuitive, so math has a lot of power to study this stuff. How am I doing for time? Plenty of time? Okay, I'll just keep going. All right. Now, the third type of math I'm going to talk about. Now, this, I'm going to admit, I'm not an expert in this. This is kind of the other type of math that I don't do. So this is, I guess you can think of math in, if you want to really boil it down, in two classes, calculus and algebra. I study algebra, and this here is calculus. I know Jeff's like, it's like, that's the worst statement in the world, but yeah, all right. So, there's something called dynamical systems, and it's the way mathematicians talk about studying situations that vary across time. And luckily, life varies across time, so it's rife with situations to be modeled by dynamical systems. So an example one is a predator-prey relationship, or something like rabbits and wolves, or cod and seal, something like that. I'm going to put up a little applet that I have, and we'll play around with that for a second. So here we have a predator-prey model. So here are, let's say these are codfish, and these are seals, yeah? Just for anybody who doesn't know, the seals eat the codfish, not the other way around. All right. So do we have the equations here? We do not. That's okay. All right. So the growth rate of the cod population is basically given by, this here tells you how fast the cod spawn. And this beta gives you some information about how hungry the seals are. Kind of how many seals, or how many cod get eaten by each seal, or how fast the seals eat the cod. This number here gives you how fast the seals die, and this number here gives you some idea of once seals have eaten a lot, how many new baby seals do they make. And so you can study that system, and you can come up with these are called, I guess, parameters that you can put into your dynamical system. And what we'll see here, that'll do. So the red guys there are the seals, and the blue guys are the cod. So we'll start this guy up. And what you'll see, this is going to vary across time. So what you're seeing here is that there's not a lot of seals, so the cod breed and breed and breed and breed. But that gives the seals loads to eat. So the seals eat and eat and eat and eat until they eat most of the cod. And then there's not a lot of cod left, so the seals die because they don't have a food source. But then because there's not a lot of seals, the cod can breed again. So you get this kind of like sinusoidal pattern, so something that kind of repeats and repeats and repeats. We can look at it in another view, which is kind of cool. So this is what this shows is that so on this axis we have the number of cod, and on this axis we have the number of seals. And so what we have here is it varies across time. We're always staying in some sort of loop. If you didn't study this problem, you're just thinking about it, you'd think, hey, maybe this will just go everywhere and there won't be a pattern to it. But it turns out that under this mathematical model, not to say it's exact, but it's a pretty good model for what goes on. We always stay in the same loop, and it just goes around, 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 around this loop. We don't go anywhere else under these conditions. So that's pretty interesting. And we can move around our starting population. So this blue guy is our starting population. Actually, let's make time go a little bigger. Let's go to 200. And you get this weird thing here. So I'm starting with a starting population here of about 1,250 cod and 260 seals or so. And so it starts, and then it decreases. Everything decreases, and you end up in this loop again. But you don't start exactly in the loop. It kind of approximates the loop and gets closer and closer and closer and closer until you're in the loop. So even though you don't start in the loop, you end up in a loop. So that's a nice property of these dynamical systems. Sometimes you have these places where things like to end up, where in this case where populations end up in a loop and a loop and a loop. We can move our starting population around as well, and if we're clever about it, we can make it so that the number of seals and the number of cod don't vary much at all. If we were really precise about it, we could have it so it doesn't vary whatsoever in this model. It's just the same. So this is something called a fixed point in a mathematical model. And again, yeah, fixed points can tell you a lot about how the dynamical system operates. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, mostly because I don't know a lot about it. All right. So I'm going to talk about one more mathematical thing related to this. We'll get to that in a second. Where am I? All right. So did you notice when you had that blue dot out here, and it went around, and it came into this loop and then never left the loop? In mathematics, we call that a steady state, or an attractor. So if you perturb your system a little bit, if something happens, the system naturally wants to get back to one of these steady states, which is really nice. This happens a lot in the world. There's some mechanisms in a lot of situations that are set up so that everything goes back to normal. And that's the idea. If you move a little away from the attractor, the system adjusts to move you back. If you're too far away, there might be another attractor that pulls you towards that. So we'll take a look at attractors in a second, and I'll tell you some examples of some attractors. So examples of this phenomenon are, imagine drinking and your liver. So you can think of that as an attracting situation. You drink a lot and you get drunk, but your liver puts you back in this steady state of soberness over time. Your liver processes the alcohol and you end up back to sober, usually anyway. Another thing is the world. So this is the big thing with climate change. The Earth has a lot of mechanisms so that it remains in a nice steady state. So if there's too much CO2 that comes out, say from a volcano or something, the Earth has a lot of mechanisms, like it can absorb CO2 in like water and rock, and then the trees that exist in the world can deal with the CO2 and make oxygen again. And then the concentration in the air changes, so the CO2 comes up out of the water and the rock, and the trees deal with that until we get back into a natural balance. Another one, and kind of a simple one to think about, is an elastic band. You pull an elastic band, and if you let it go, it goes back to its regular shape. So its steady state is just a loose elastic band. Even though you pull it and you move it around, you let it go, the system wants to go back to that steady state. So let's take a look at this. I have another little applet here. So what I have here, this here is our steady state in the middle that I want to talk about. Let's say that's sober. We'll talk about the drinking example since we're in Cape Breton. So if I have a little bit to drink, then let's say my state moves to, let me stop the system for a second. So let's say my state moves to over here, which is kind of drunk, yeah? So that little dot there, I know it's a little hard to see, but either one of these dots you can imagine. Now, what the system does, you can think what your liver does, is over time, it makes it so that these dots fall back down the hole into being sober. So if I move just a little bit outside that, if I get a little bit drunk, then my liver can process the alcohol and move me back into the sober, steady state. However, let's say that I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink, and I end up somewhere out here where my liver has a hard time processing it. Then what happens is this sober, steady state isn't strong enough to attract it back. Or you can think of it, my liver isn't strong enough to deal with the alcohol. So it goes to another steady state, so it falls down here, which is called death, and you die. And this is a very important thing, especially when it comes to climate change. This is why it's a big deal. Is so these steady states, it's not like once you move from one steady state to another, it's easy to move back. In a lot of cases, the situation changes and it's irreversible, and the parameters change the whole dynamical system. Just like when it comes to liver and dying because of alcohol. It's not like, well, I'll just take some alcohol out of his body and then he'll come back to life. That doesn't happen. When you're dead, you're dead. It changes the system, and in some cases, it's impossible to go back to the previous state. So you have to be really careful about that. You ever hear the term tipping point? This is what they mean by tipping point. It's the place where moving to a state, instead of being attracted to the attractor that you're used to, it's attracted to a different attractor. So that's a tipping point. And the thing is, we only know one attractor. We know the steady state of our world. We don't know what the other attractor does. We have some guesses. Some mathematicians and biologists and chemists and physicists have all been working on ideas of what happens when climate change keeps going. Are we going to be in one of these situations where it runs wild and we can't get back to a livable world? But really, they're still models, and we don't really know. We can only guess at it. And me being a mathematician, I like to only talk about things that I know of and not venturing too far into situations where the outcome might be certain death. So I think a really good idea is try and stay in this steady state, this basin of stability here. And so I guess examples of moving to this new attractor, just like I said, is when you drink too much alcohol and then your liver can't process it and you die. And if we emit too many greenhouse gases and the world warms up too much and we don't have, the world doesn't have enough systems to deal with this, and then the world catches on fire and we die. Or if you pull the elastic band too much and it snaps and you die. Well, you probably wouldn't die. But yeah, and you can imagine this. You can't get the elastic band back to its previous state. So once you're out of that steady state, you can't get back in it. So I guess that's 3 mathematical concepts I talked about tonight. And I think I'll leave it there. So I'd like to thank you guys for coming and listening to me wax about my passion about math, and I'm so glad that I have the opportunity to do it in the CBRM. This is my home. I've been here for years, and I'd like to stay as long as I can. So thanks again.